Well, hi everyone. I'm Ash Cleary, an associate at LDV Capital. I'm thrilled to be moderating this next panel on visual tech advancements in material science, structuring new material discovery and development. I am very happy to be introducing the following: Dr. Kristen Smith, Strategy Assistant for Accelerated Discovery and Vice Chair of Physical Sciences Council at IBM. Dr. Chiranjeevi Gopal, co-founder and CTO at Mitrachem, the first lithium-ion battery materials manufacturer. Dr. Amanda Petford-Long, Director of the Material Science Division at Argonne National Lab. And finally, Dr. David Smith, Associate Chair and James B. Duke Distinguished Professor of ECE at Duke University. Welcome, everyone. How are you all?
Doing well, thanks, Ash.
Excellent. Well, it's so good to see all of you. All of you are esteemed experts within the material science field, so I feel honored to be driving this panel discussion today. Let's start with some quick introductions from you all. Amanda, please feel free to start us off, and then we can be followed by Chiranjeevi, David, and then Kristen.
Thanks very much. Hello, everyone. I'll say good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. So I have been at Argonne National Lab for the last nearly 19 years. I lead the Material Science Division, and I also lead Argonne's Microelectronics Institute. And visual tech is just something we're doing all the time. We rely so much on visual data, and we need AI to process it all, understand it all, and then do something useful with it. So I'll stop there, Ash.
Hey, everybody. My name is Chiranjeevi Gopal, Chiru for short. Thank you, Ash, and thank you, Evan, and the LDV team for this wonderful opportunity to be part of the LDV Vision Summit. Like Ash introduced myself, I'm Chiru. I'm the CTO and one of the co-founders of Mitrachem. We are a lithium-ion battery material developer and manufacturer, and the differentiator we bring is in being able to use machine learning and other tools to accelerate the process from developing a material in the lab to actually scaling it and making it manufacturing ready. In terms of background, I'm a chemist by training, but most of my working life has been spent at the intersection of data science and building physical devices.
David, would you like to go next?
Oh, sure. So I'm David Smith at Duke University since 2004. Before that, I was at UCSD. My area is metamaterials, which are artificially structured materials. So I'm a little bit materials adjacent, but really the confluence of advanced materials plus artificial structures is the sort of thing I look at. And what part of our research resulted in the field of metamaterials when we developed a material with a negative index of refraction back when I was at UCSD. And that sort of is a poster child for a metamaterial because it's a material that can't exist in nature. But had been predicted by a Russian physicist in the 60s. So with the development of that, and then later on the invisibility cloak that we did at Duke, which also used metamaterials, that sort of touched off what is now sort of the metamaterials field. And then towards around 2012, started working to actually make things more practical and start spinning off companies that relate to metamaterials. So in the context of things, materials is a great interest, and how you duplicate that functionality with artificial structures is where I kind of sit.
Hi, I'm Kristen. Happy to be here. Thanks for the invitation. I'm at IBM Research for the past 11 years. I'm also a chemist by training, but ventured into the world of AI. So we are developing AI for kind of scientific application, my group specifically for identifying concerning materials and then replace them with safer alternatives. And as the previous speaker talked about, we also really concentrate on developing AI models that work collaboratively with the human expert, because none of us can do it alone, I think. And happy to be part of the panel discussion.
Wonderful. Well, you all have such incredible backgrounds, so thank you again for all being here. Let me briefly provide some context to get started to our audience about the topic we're discussing today. As you all know, for decades, materials discovery has depended on costly trial and error methods that have slowed innovation, but with cutting-edge AI and machine learning, we can now design new materials faster and more efficiently than ever. Generative models are advancing beyond composition to processing, form, and real-world application constraints, unlocking breakthroughs in molecules, chemicals, and materials across industries. With that in mind, let's first dive into how the present day looks like for developments in material science powered by visual tech and AI. For the panel, what present day trends and opportunities leveraging visual tech for new material discovery and development are exciting you the most? Who would like to start?
I can go first. That's okay.
Cool.
So I can provide a unique perspective because we are both making a physical material, and as an entrepreneur that's taken investor money to build a revenue generating business, you often have to balance taking as little risk as possible to get to revenue, which means going with a tried and tested approach of human intuition guided synthesis, but also at the same time doing something differentiated where you take AI powered advances to like speed up the development cycles. I think compared to like 5 years ago, where techniques like Bayesian optimization and other approaches were maybe the only ways to like look at data and speed up like the development cycles, I'm personally excited by, incorporating generative AI advances to actually sift through literature that already exists, often simplifying years of graduate student time or like scientist time to assimilate what's been done and translate that into a tangible product, right? So how can we leverage advances in AI to, like I said, augment human intuition to be able to speed up the timeline, not just to discover, but actually synthesize and make that material real, whether at a lab scale or at a pilot scale.
So I can go next if you like. Thanks, Chair.
Sure.
So we at Argonne National Lab is a Department of Energy national lab, and so we do from basic science right through to applied and then out to industry. I really resonated with something that Akila said, which is that the best way forward is to have the human and the machine learning together, because we still need the scientists, despite what some of my computer scientist colleagues say, to come up with the great questions, to think about what the problems are that we actually want to solve. And so, we also need experimental validation, as she also mentioned. That's so important. So we may use AI to start with. Let's down select, and then the materials that we actually want to use, perhaps for a microelectronics component, we will then, I'm talking about new materials with new phenomena that we're basing the microelectronics on. We will go and model those, simulate those, but then we'll take them to something like our synchrotron or an electron microscope to image them and understand something about their behavior by looking at in situ experiments, and then feed that output back into our model and so refine it in a kind of circular way. And so we're finding that that's really the best way, but you can't do it without the scientists, at least not yet. And I hope that's going to be a while out or we'll all be out of jobs.
Are there some examples in particular, Amanda, of the microelectronics research that you're working on right now and you can share with us?
Sure. So, I think one of the important areas we're looking at is processing, because that's an area that is traditionally been done it perhaps relatively slowly. We're looking at things like atomic layer deposition, where you put atoms down a layer at a time. You can design your materials. It used to be done at a tiny scale. Now we can do it wafer scale, and we will both look at the fundamentals that underlie the processes. We'll do simulations, and then we'll do our experiments, look and see what happens, and then we can translate that out. So an example is looking at 2D materials, where you want a new material, for example, could be a 2D semiconductor, you could just be using it for heat transfer, but understanding the process so that you can just use your AI then to design ways of doing it at scale, patterning it maybe. Those are that's just one example, Ash, of something we're working on.
Cool. David or Kristen, what's exciting you today?
Yeah, I want to add to what Amanda and Shira said. What excites me the most is like developing systems that can actually work together collaboratively with the human expert. And we're trying to build systems that can capture some of that intuition. I think everybody who is an expert in a field knows that we developed over time a certain intuition about processes and sometimes understand things which we can't even like explain. but then teach an AI like we would teach a student basically to work with us and learn from us. This is, I think, a really exciting field in AI right now, that this could be really a partner for us and not just a tool or somebody replacing us.
Yeah, in our work, I haven't found necessarily the case yet for AI. It seems to be when you have a large, copious amounts of data to sift through, that it tends to be useful. One area where I can imagine it being useful is in the case where you have a material that is very sensitive to its fabrication, its manufactured, its yield. There could be a lot of data that comes out of processes like that AI may be able to sift through and find the right sort of process and define that quicker. So that's what I'd sort of look towards, as an agent that helps the people actually doing the empirical and experimental work.
Right. I guess, on that topic of large-scale data and models, it can be argued that the recent AI and machine learning-based developments for materials kickstarted when Google DeepMind published their GNOME model back in November 2023 that uses deep learning to discover new materials faster than ever before. Since then, there's been more large-scale models and tools that have been published, such as Microsoft unveiling MetaGen and MetaSim late last year. Do these new large-scale models and tools excite you all in terms of pushing forward the field, or should we, on the other hand, pump the brakes on how successful these larger scale models or one model fits all approaches might be?
I'd be very careful with a one model fits all. If computer scientists who say, well, there must be a single equation that will tell you everything about material science. And there is. There's Schrödinger's equation, basic quantum mechanics. But it's useless because it doesn't tell us about the properties and the behavior of the materials that we need to know about. So you're absolutely right. But, we also need to be looking at all the data that are out there in all the scientific papers that have been published over probably a century now, right? Depending on how far back you go and what materials you want to look at.
Sure.
It's a question of how to mine that and also get the information out that you want. But I think you still come back to the fact you need somebody there who can interpret what you find, Ash, and make sure that what you don't go off down some rabbit hole, which is actually not going to lead you anywhere because there's masses of data. But can you actually make sense of it?
Maybe I'll just add on to what Amanda said here. It's important to think about materials are not one type, right? So there is in bio, it's molecular materials. As you go to energy, you talk about systems. So there's materials. That is, if you peel a battery open, right? A battery is, I can see this physically, it's a big object. You peel that open, you have 10 active materials, electrodes. You peel those electrodes open, you put it in a microscope, you see tiny particles. And then you go even further into particles, you have the chemistry, right? So you have this length scale that spans 10 orders of magnitude and a time scale for these processes which spans multiple orders of magnitude. So when we discover materials that work in isolation, that often it's great, but ultimately it's systems level. How does it work in a device that ends up being the true bottleneck? So I really commend the work that happened with the A Lab. So I really know Gert Seder really well, the person that pushed the work on this autonomous self-driving labs that you're talking about, Ash, in collaboration with DeepMind, and MatterGen and MatterSim that came out of Microsoft as well. Like I know the folks that run there. Those are great from a perspective of reducing the cost of data points. Like I think there was a reference made in the LDB article, right? True materials innovation often need about 100,000 iterations to make happen. And each iteration is very expensive. It's like $1,000 or so. So that's like $100 million discovery effort. So I think where these A-Lab-like efforts are really powerful is in lowering the cost of data points. But that's still a huge gap from pointing out this molecule could be useful to actually make it work. Because actually making it work requires you to need a systems level model, which we don't have. And this is where like running syntheses in the lab or in companies like us are doing the same thing. We are working on materials which have been postulated 15 years ago. They're still not application ready for a reason.
I guess with that in mind, Chiru, And maybe this transitions us into thinking over the next 5 years or so. You've co-founded the first lithium-ion battery materials manufacturer, focusing on shortening the lab to production timeline significantly, and really trying to address R&D and scale up speed as a barrier to innovation. What future challenges in the next 5 years do you envision needing to overcome to continuing to scale innovation, and what role will visual tech play in overcoming those challenges?
I want to add just to what David actually mentioned, right? In the lab in R&D, it's the iteration timeline that's often the problem. And speeding that up often means reducing the cost of acquiring data points. And we operate in a small data regime. If you calculate all the data points you have collected in the last 4 years as a company, it's maybe 3,000 or 4,000, like different samples. It takes time and money to make these happen. So like, how do you learn as quickly as possible from a limited data set? You need the biggest dimensionality reducer is physics, and then comes data, right? So I think that's what we've done. I think the next frontier, I think, for us to continue innovating, like, or continue to be efficient at scaling up, it works really well in the lab. How do I make chocolate chip cookies basically at like, 100,000 people, right? It's not the same problem as cooking at home. There, it's basically how do you use advances in, machine learning and generative AI to sift through data quickly to point outliers? How do you increase the operational efficiency of process scale-up? Process optimization is the way to very quickly minimize the cost of failures, reduce failures at scale. So I'm personally very excited, and we have a small effort internally in our company towards tapping into advances in AI to be able to reduce the translation gap from lab to scale, basically.
So an interesting challenge for AI is, I was thinking about superconductors. So superconductivity was the transition temperature was set for years, decades at a certain temperature, and then at some point the copper oxides were discovered, and that was a huge increase in the transition temperature for the superconducting temperature for superconductors. No one was thinking of looking at those. It was caught the world by surprise. But once that was found, there was a steady incremental increase in TC as time went by, when people suddenly knew what sorts of things to look at. You can imagine AI at this point being very good at taking that incremental piece and shortening that timeline drastically. Could it predict, and will it predict, the next high TC, the next big jump in superconducting temperature? That I sort of differentiates for me what AI can and can't do.
Mm-hmm.
I think even on the first part where you do the incremental steps, a lot of time we don't know what parameters really control the processes, and we don't capture a lot of these. And it goes also back, like, sifting through all the literature from the last decade or so, or century. Sometimes the important thing isn't captured because we didn't think about it, like the temperature or the humidity or whatever, like the environment parameters. So I think another exciting field that's coming is actually all these like automated labs that have a lot of IoT devices that really capture everything. Yeah. And then the AI is really good in finding these correlations that we don't see sometimes. So it goes more to the processing next incremental step. I agree. It's to be seen if the AI can really come with the next jump in a discovery, because that's really outside of the data it saw. And most of our discoveries were an accident, right? So maybe AI also makes some accidents in the future.
To that point, Kristen, would an AI vision system be sitting on top of what is occurring in lab, and then the AI interprets the results? Or where do you see the vision aspect coming into play?
So I don't know a vision as we like optical vision, but we will have a lot of IoT devices which capture all kind of like physical parameters, like, I mean, temperature, humidity, maybe how light it is in a lab. I mean, especially the semiconductor labs, right? They need special lighting because these materials are very sensitive to certain wavelengths. All these things you can capture these days, and then you can build these digital twins, which basically duplicate your fab or your lab into like an AI system. And then if you change parameters, the system can predict how the real system would react to it. And then if you combine that with the materials models, actually, because as Shira said at the beginning, none of the materials in material science is just one molecule. to understand. It's a system, it's a formulation, it's a system of many materials that need to work together. With a process, all these materials change depending how you process them. So all of that needs to work together, and the AI needs to understand this all together and not just one part of the whole equation.
Yeah. The systems part is really important. I mean, everything's happening at the interfaces between the materials. And those can be, in a way, quite unpredictable depending on how they're processed. And if you don't understand that, you're not going to understand how to put the different layers in your semiconductor device together. You're not going to understand how to get heat out. You're certainly not going to understand how batteries work, because those are just all about interfaces. So it's a question of doing that. It is iteration in a way, but to what information can you capture? What visual information can you capture? It could be hyperspectral data, the similar to a colleague talking earlier about the soil samples. We capture that same kind of information from materials. And so we know how they behave spatially. And then perhaps we can go back, and hopefully we have recorded, Kristen, things like the temperature and the humidity and all those other parameters, which are probably what control the process. And those are the little things that the graduate students never write down because they don't think it's important, and then they can't reproduce their work. So hopefully AI can definitely do better because it will capture that.
And one thing to lay it on as well, Ash, is all of these discovery efforts you've talked about, right? They all tend to just talk about whether a material is often thought of as just a chemistry, meaning it's a collection of A, B, C molecules. But the same A, B, C composition can give, depending on how you make it, the morphology is all important, right? I can take the same material we make and design it for a car battery, or design it for a watch battery, or design it for a vacuum cleaner battery, all of which are very different use cases simply because of morphology, which is a very visual property, right? And a lot of the work that Argonne National Lab with Amanda Petford's institution does is around sort of how do you use both X-rays, which is not in the visible range, but also visible information, to understand how morphology maps onto real-world applications, right? This was a very expensive endeavor 5 years ago. I think the cost of that has come down a lot now in terms of what advances in AI can do on the analysis. I think I'm personally excited by what, in the 5 to 10 years out, we can have basically vision into how materials form when you cook them in the oven to guide how we basically do process optimization. What was like an opaque black box process is now becoming a process where we can actually have vision and now have the capability to analyze it in real time as well.
Yeah. Not just processing, how it behaves. Sorry.
Actually, what Kristen said is it makes me think that it would be great to have an agent looking over your shoulder, watching as you do empirical work, because it's right that everything matters, and you only think of certain things to write down and record. But if something was watching, you might discover that there was a hidden variable that you just didn't think was important. And so we used to, get involved in trying to write everything down and document in a lab book. That's kind of old-fashioned now. Having that piece, analyzed and recorded in some way makes a lot of sense, actually.
We actually tried this. We call this the lab that learns, where you had like these glasses with a little camera that records your vision. You get into privacy issues real soon with this.
Right. Yeah.
But it was a great kind of like just demonstrator that you can. The technology is already there to capture everything you do in the lab. You just need to bring this all together, right, and build AI on top of it.
Yeah.
So David, actually, the pandemic was useful because Turi mentioned the X-ray, the big X-ray sources in our electron microscopes at Argonne, and we had to make those more automated because nobody was able to come on site, so everybody was accessing them remotely. And so that's where we did actually start making the systems themselves record every single piece of information as metadata, which went with the image that we collect. And we now collect a lot more metadata than we used to. And so if we're doing real time, I don't know, looking at how a chip works inside under the X-ray beam or something, you've got all that information that's stored there, ready for AI to come in and basically tell you what to do next with the experiment.
Yeah, no, I was involved in a biotech spin out, and I just have nightmares about the days of doing reactions, looking for something to happen, and it happens one day, and then the next day you think you're doing exactly the same thing, and it doesn't work at all. And this is absolutely where something, if you had that record, maybe you'd be able to track that down.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
An interesting point being brought up by the audience is that although AI may design new materials with optimized properties, the manufacturing of these optimized properties might prove to be extremely difficult, if not impossible, going forward. David, I know you're nodding your head, and your expertise is in metamaterials. Would you perhaps like to touch on that topic and how you think we may be able to overcome those manufacturing challenges?
Well, I mentioned that potentially used for AI might be in that manufacturing stage to not generate the material necessarily, but to figure out how to make it more manufacturable and look at some of these processes. But part of the reason for doing metamaterials is to sort of have a construct where you can take maybe marginal materials that do interesting things, but may not be as strong themselves as you might like them, and leverage some of the properties that you get when you create a structure around them. So part of my motivation for metamaterials is to actually make advanced materials and emerging materials more useful.
Great. Well, we have about 5 minutes or so, so we'd love to move on to perhaps a final topic we can cover. Really thinking about what are the holy grail trends and opportunities for visual tech and material science that may be unlikely to occur in the next decade, but are 10 to 20 years away from becoming reality, really at the bleeding edge, leapfrog, not possible today, but will be in the future. It's a question of when, not if. We'd love to go around the virtual room here and hear your respective thoughts on those opportunities and advancements leveraging visual tech in the next 10 to 20 years from now for materials discovery and development.
I'm happy to start. I think for us, it's the convergence of bringing different sort of computing together. Like, I mean, we started in material science with like HPC computing, like high performance computing, basically on large scale CPU systems to physically simulate materials data. Right now, we enter the realm of AI helping us out with GPUs. Quantum is, I don't know where it is exactly, but it's coming. So hopefully once quantum is also there and showed the quantum advantage, but then bringing all these three systems together to get the best of all of these and converge them into one overarching compute system that then agents, AI agents and human can use to really understand. Because AI doesn't understand, AI finds pattern, right? I mean, to be honest, but really to understand what's going on in these materials. I think that would be, I don't know if we get there, but it would be great.
Sure. Are there any quantum computing research projects or innovations currently that are exciting you, Kristen, or is it still a hypothetical and several years away?
Well, we do have quantum computers, and there's a lot of research trying to find basically the killer use case on the quantum computer and really show that the quantum computer can calculate something you couldn't otherwise, right? And materials is usually the poster child because materials are inherently quantum mechanical systems, so it should be a good system to understand it. It just hasn't been shown yet. And I'm saying yet, I'm pretty sure we will get there, but we're not there yet.
Right.
I think when you're talking about imaging as a specific with respect to materials, I think there's a sort of a confluence that could happen because we have things that sense, which is the vision part, and then things that perceive, which is the AI processing part. And the better those two work together, the more efficient the overall system is. So you don't want to have something that's sort of a traditional front-end architecture that's taking images and then having to calculate and crunch all that data through an ASIC or an FPGA or something that is really consuming tons of energy and power to do what could be more simply done if you had a little, some hardware changes. So adding materials, advanced materials, and putting more things in the hardware layer ultimately will make something that's better matched to the processing and the perception, make all that happen in sort of maybe even a biomimetic way, using some of the techniques that are emerging now.
I can go next. I think we have focused a lot on sort of the technologies that could come to fruition in the next 10 years, I guess. Maybe I'll talk a little bit about the problem that I would challenge the technology to solve, right? So synthesis by design, to me, would be really important. Why am I saying that, right? Traditional materials fields are very old school. Like, it's very hard to convince a plant worker or a lab worker to say, hey, use an AI generated material to do this, right? It's often a cultural game as well, on top of the technology being where it is. I think that if we can, leverage the advances in AI to be able to, show a good use case where we have not just designed the molecule or a material, but actually design it under constraints of a real world application, and then deploy it and show that it actually went end to end. That to me would be a huge win to have. And I think that's possible at the pace of development in the next 10-year to 20-year timeframe.
Kiru, can you
That's a large delta, but yeah.
Can you briefly define synthesis by design just for the audience?
Sure. Synthesis by design to me means not just coming up with a molecule and saying this is good for an application, it meets a specification, is how are you going to make it? I think the Offer's question was very, very true, which is, what does manufacturability mean, right? Because stuff in the lab and in a production line fails for very real reasons, oftentimes hard to featureize in an AI or a machine learning model. So, what starting materials of iron or phosphorus or whatever, nickel, do I need to make this material? What are the steps I need to carry out to actually synthesize it, right? So if you didn't know how to make chocolate chip cookies today, can you actually have an AI that tells you the sequence of steps to make it? Sure, I know that mixing chocolate, butter, and sugar is going to make something delicious, but can I actually make the product I want under the constraints I want?
Right.
I love the chocolate chip analogy. That's great.
I'm actually going to go eat one right now. So.
Amanda, lucky lost.
Yeah.
What
So,
is exciting you.
so we've actually been playing with using large language models to do exactly what Jerry's suggesting. We asked a couple of large language models to design a new ferroelectric material. So we told it what we wanted to do. We wanted this new ferroelectric material for memory. And then we asked it how we would make it. And it gave us a list of the model gave us a list of kind of temperature regimes we could try, told us pressures we could use. It told us actually some really cool stuff that we did go up and check on later to make sure it wasn't lying to us. And it was all good. It was all good information. So that was really synthesis by design. And we then went to the next step to say, okay, now we've got this material. Give me a workflow for doing an experiment to image the properties and the behavior of this material. And it did amazingly well. So I was pleasantly surprised. I've been a bit skeptical about this. What it couldn't do, though, was be truthful to us, and this was where it started hallucinating, on scientific papers. It made them up, quite frankly. The information was correct, and it would either get the title right or the authors right or the journal right, but never all three together. So there's still room for fact checking, but it did way better than we were. Why LLMs? Because it was a challenge that was set. The National Lab Complex had something they called a 1,000 Scientist AI Day, and so they just, for that particular event, were playing with LLMs. So we had a few to play with. Andrea asked a question, why LLMs? It's a good question. I was interested by it because I didn't think they'd work.
Well, there's certainly a lot to look forward to, and unfortunately, we've run out of time. Even though we could probably talk about this for several hours, I'd like to thank all of our fantastic panelists once again for such an engaging conversation. We at LDV continue to be very excited about the future of material science discovery and development powered by visual tech.
Thank you, Ash.
Thank you.
Thank you.